Billionaire Ethan Hayes had built a reputation for being one of the most brilliant and unshakable men in America. At just 32 years old, he was already the founder and driving force behind Hayes & Co., a lifestyle technology empire that stretched from fashion e-commerce to high-end retail. Reporters loved to call him a visionary. Investors described him as ruthless but reliable. Women across glossy magazines whispered that he was the dream catch of the decade. Yet behind the polished tuxedos and the calm smirk that rarely slipped on camera, Ethan was tired. Tired of the endless parties, tired of shallow conversations, and tired of the constant question that never left his mind. Was anyone capable of seeing him for more than his fortune? That question lingered on the night of the Carter Foundation Gala. The ballroom shimmered with golden lights, crystal chandeliers. Through reflections across gowns worth more than a suburban house, and 100 cameras flashed as if competing with the sparkle of diamonds. Ethan stood near the edge of the crowd, nursing a glass of champagne he had no intention of drinking. He felt like a man trapped in a theater where everyone else knew their lines except him. The laughter around him was bright, practiced, and hollow. He was almost ready to disappear when two women caught his eye. They were identical twins, yet they could not have been more different. Sophia Carter carried herself like the queen of the room. Every strand of her hair was perfectly in place. Her sequined dress clung to her like armor, and her confident wave to the photographers signaled she was used to attention. Beside her walked her sister Lila, the contrast almost startling. Lila wore a modest navy gown that did not try to compete with the glitter around her. Her steps were small, her smile uncertain, and she clutched a small purse like it was her shield. If Sophia seemed born for the spotlight, Lila looked like she had stumbled into it by accident. Ethan felt an unusual curiosity stir within him. He had seen hundreds of women at galas just like this one, each eager to talk about deals, yachts, or new luxury vacations. But something about the silent difference between these sisters made him pause. On an impulse, he turned to James, his longtime personal aide. With a spark of reckless energy, he whispered that he was going to try something different tonight. Something that might reveal more than any interview or flirtation ever could. Within the hour, Ethan arranged for 2 identical envelopes to be delivered. Each contained a single black credit card tied to his private account. No limits, no instructions, only the promise of freedom. For 48 hours, each sister could spend as she wished. The only condition was simple. When the time was over, they would meet him again, and he would see what choices they made. Viewers, what would you do if handed a card with no ceiling? Would you chase luxury, or would you choose something entirely different? Let us know in the comments where you are watching from, and do not forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Because what one sister bought would shock everyone, and what the shy sister bought would touch Ethan's heart in a way he never expected. Ethan Hayes was 32 years old, and already the head of an empire most men twice his age could not dream of building. Hayes & Co. had begun as a tiny e-commerce experiment in his college dorm room, an online platform for lifestyle products and fashion brands that promised faster delivery and a cleaner interface than the retail giants could offer. What started as a gamble with 2 credit cards and sleepless nights had grown into a multi-billion-dollar corporation, with offices in New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, and partnerships with global designers who trusted Ethan's instincts more than they trusted their own market researchers. To the outside world, he was the picture of success. He appeared on magazine covers with perfect posture, sharp gray eyes that seemed to see through competitors, and tailored suits that whispered power. Yet what the glossy pages did not reveal was how heavy his past weighed on him, shaping his every decision and shadowing his every relationship. Ethan had grown up in a modest home in Chicago. His father worked long hours as a mechanical engineer, and his mother stayed home until Ethan was 10, when she began volunteering at cultural events. Life was simple but warm until one evening when Ethan overheard the argument that would divide his world forever. His mother had fallen in love with another man, a wealthy businessman, who promised her a life of luxury that her husband could not provide. Within weeks she was gone, leaving behind only a short letter and a perfume bottle that Ethan would never open again. At 10 years old, he had stood at the doorway, watching her car disappear down the street, unable to comprehend how someone could choose diamonds over family. That betrayal etched itself deep into his soul. His father never recovered from the heartbreak. Though he remained in Ethan's life and provided stability, the house grew colder, conversations shorter, and dinners quieter. Ethan buried his pain in academics, pushing himself to excel in every subject. By the time he reached high school, he was already tutoring older students in mathematics and coding small programs that fascinated teachers. But beneath the achievements was a teenager who no longer believed in unconditional love. Relationships, he decided, were transactional. People stayed as long as they benefited. The moment someone wealthier or more influential appeared, they left. That belief hardened when he entered Stanford. Surrounded by young men and women, dazzled by Silicon Valley ambition, Ethan kept his circle small. He watched classmates pair off quickly, only to dissolve weeks later when someone with a better car or brighter future crossed their path. He promised himself he would never be fooled, never be vulnerable, and never let a smile hide an ulterior motive. Ironically, it was that determination that propelled him to success. While others partied or squandered opportunities, Ethan built Hayes & Co. with relentless focus. He coded late into the night, pitched investors during the day, and negotiated contracts with a precision that startled older executives. By 27, he had become a billionaire, the youngest on Forbes's list. And though congratulations poured in from around the globe, Ethan celebrated alone with a single glass of scotch in his minimalist penthouse. The solitude did not bother him at first. He told himself it was safer this way. Women who flirted at events were politely entertained, but never allowed close. He learned to recognize the gleam in their eyes when they asked about his cars or his private jet. He saw the disappointment when he suggested dinner at a quiet bistro instead of a 5-star rooftop. They were not interested in him, only in the status he represented. The more he experienced it, the more his walls grew higher. James Whittaker, his loyal aide and closest confidant, once remarked that Ethan lived in a glass tower, not because he enjoyed the view, but because he liked seeing threats approach before they could hurt him. Ethan had laughed at the time, but deep down, he knew James was right. His penthouse in Manhattan overlooked the skyline, every window, a reminder of how far he had climbed, yet how far he had distanced himself from ordinary life. Inside those walls, he was safe, efficient, untouchable. But he was also profoundly lonely. Nights stretched long when the meetings ended and the parties faded. Sometimes he would stand on the balcony watching couples walk hand in hand along the street, below tiny figures wrapped in laughter and simple affection. He wondered what it might feel like to be loved, not for wealth, not for the empire he controlled, but simply for being Ethan. He wanted to believe it was possible, yet the memory of his mother's departure whispered otherwise. She had said she loved him once, and then she had left. Why would anyone else be different? These contradictions carved a man who was both admired and misunderstood. To business partners, he was a genius strategist. To employees, he was a demanding leader who rewarded excellence and had no patience for mediocrity. To the media, he was the enigmatic billionaire whose romantic life remained a mystery. And to himself, he was just a boy, still standing at that doorway in Chicago, watching his mother choose wealth over family. That wound never healed. It guided his every interaction with women. He dated occasionally, but always kept it shallow. A week of dinners, a few events, and then a polite goodbye before anyone could expect more. If they grew upset, he wrote a check to their favorite charity, and the headlines painted him as generous rather than cold. It was easier that way, safer, predictable. Until the Carter Gala approached. Ethan agreed to sponsor the event because it aligned with his corporate responsibility program, a chance to show Hayes & Co. cared about underprivileged youth and education. He did not anticipate that the evening would stir something restless inside him. As he prepared in his dressing room, adjusting his cufflinks with mechanical precision, James teased him about his perpetual frown. "Why do you attend these galas if you hate them so much?" James asked. Ethan replied with his usual half-smile. "Because sometimes you find out what people want most when you put them in a room full of glitter." He did not know that this gala would put that philosophy to the ultimate test. Ethan entered the ballroom expecting the same routine, the same clinking glasses, the same practiced laughter. Instead, he would discover that not everyone was blinded by money, and that realization would challenge everything he thought he knew about women, about trust, and about himself. Before that night, he had been the untouchable billionaire, scarred but undefeated. After that night, he would begin a journey that would make him question whether love could exist outside the shadow of wealth. The Carter sisters had grown up in the same modest house in Portland. Yet from the moment they were old enough to walk, their paths began to diverge in ways that fascinated anyone who met them. Sophia Carter was the older by only 3 minutes, but she carried that birthright like a crown. She was bold, striking, and loved the attention that followed her wherever she went. Her dark blonde hair was styled to perfection, her wardrobe curated to match the season's trends, and her voice carried the sharp confidence of a woman who knew what she wanted and how to get it. From high school onward, Sophia dreamed of fashion shows, glossy covers, and an audience that would cheer her name. She pursued those dreams relentlessly, studying fashion merchandising in Los Angeles and using every internship and connection to build her network. By her late 20s, she was already being recognized as a rising star in the West Coast fashion scene, collaborating with boutique designers and attending industry events where her Instagram following exploded. She believed in visibility, in being seen and admired, and in shaping her identity through luxury. To her, life was a runway, and she intended to walk it flawlessly. Her twin sister Lila could not have been more different. While Sophia reveled in the spotlight, Lila often hid from it. She had the same features as her sister, the same gray-blue eyes, and delicate bone structure, but she seemed to soften everything about her appearance, as if afraid of being noticed too much. Her chestnut hair was usually pulled into a loose bun, her makeup minimal. Her clothes chosen for comfort and modest beauty rather than extravagance. Lila found her joy not in parties or public applause, but in music. Their parents had enrolled them in piano lessons as children, and while Sophia quit after a year, Lila continued her small fingers, learning to coax gentle melodies out of worn keys. For her, music became more than a hobby. It became a language to express the emotions she could not easily voice. After college, she chose not to chase high salaries or glamorous positions. Instead, she took a part-time job as a piano teacher and volunteered at a local orphanage, teaching children songs and chords that lit up their eyes with excitement. She did not earn much money, but she felt rich in other ways, surrounded by laughter and the sound of music filling empty halls. To outsiders, Sophia and Lila seemed like contrasts carved for a novel, one sister embodying ambition and the other humility. Yet beneath the differences lay a bond forged through years of protecting each other from a sometimes harsh world. Sophia often teased Lila for being too shy, but she was also fiercely protective whenever anyone else dared to mock her sister. Lila admired Sophia's confidence, even when she rolled her eyes at her extravagance. They loved each other, but they also carried the inevitable tension of two people whose lives moved in opposite directions. That tension grew sharper as Sophia's career demanded more visibility. She thrived on sponsorships, collaborations, and public appearances. She was invited to charity galas, fashion weeks, and networking parties where the elite mingled. It was at one of these events, the Carter Foundation Gala, funded partly by Hayes & Co., that Sophia insisted Lila accompany her. Lila hesitated at first. Crowded ballrooms full of strangers made her nervous, and she had lessons scheduled at the orphanage that weekend. But Sophia was persuasive. She told her sister that this was not only a chance to dress up and enjoy herself, but also to support a cause that mattered. The gala's proceeds went toward educational programs for disadvantaged youth, a mission close to Lila's heart. Against her natural instincts, Lila agreed. The night of the gala, the differences between the sisters shone brighter than ever. Sophia wore a sequined silver gown that clung like liquid metal and caught the light of every chandelier. She knew cameras would be present, and she intended to dominate every photograph. She greeted acquaintances with practiced charm, her laughter ringing confidently as she posed for selfies with influencers and designers. Lila, in contrast, chose a navy blue dress, simple in cut but elegant in detail. She carried a small vintage clutch and wore her mother's old pendant, a sentimental piece she treasured more than any brand name accessory. Walking into the ballroom beside her radiant twin, she felt like a shadow trailing behind a star. She wished she could vanish, yet she also reminded herself that she was here to support the children she loved teaching. If this event raised money for them, then enduring a night of discomfort was worth it. The sisters drew attention immediately. Photographers snapped pictures of Sophia and whispered about her striking twin. Some guests assumed both were models, others speculated that perhaps they were launching a brand together. Ethan Hayes, standing near the edge of the crowd with James, his aide, noticed them almost instantly. To him, the contrast was not just striking, but symbolic. Sophia embodied everything he had come to expect from women at such galas: beauty, confidence, ambition, and the gleam of someone who measured success by luxury. Lila embodied something he rarely saw: quiet grace, modesty, and an air of authenticity that seemed untouched by the glittering surroundings. Ethan could not explain why his attention kept drifting back to her, but he found himself curious. He wanted to know what story lay behind those cautious eyes. As the evening progressed, Sophia moved with ease from group to group, networking effortlessly, while Lila stayed close to the refreshment table, sipping water and observing the crowd with a mixture of awe and unease. Guests who approached often addressed Sophia directly, barely acknowledging Lila. It was not unusual, and Lila had grown accustomed to being overlooked in her sister's shadow. Yet tonight, something felt different, as if someone was watching her. Not with indifference, but with intent interest. She did not know that Ethan was studying her from across the room, silently comparing the twin sisters and wondering if fate had just placed before him the perfect opportunity to test his lingering question about human nature. Why did women make the choices they did when money erased limits? Could character truly reveal itself in spending? Could sincerity survive temptation? These thoughts simmered as the music played and the gala continued, setting the stage for the test that would alter all their lives. The Carter Foundation Gala reached its peak as the auction ended and the orchestra struck up a lively tune. Waiters carried trays of champagne flutes through the crowd, and cameras continued to flash, while donors congratulated one another for their generous pledges. Ethan Hayes stood apart, his gray eyes scanning the glittering sea of gowns and tuxedos with a detachment that came from years of repetition. He had seen it all before, yet tonight felt strangely different. The sight of the Carter twins lingered in his mind, a contrast so sharp it stirred an idea that was both reckless and irresistible. He leaned toward James and murmured that he was about to do something unplanned. James, long accustomed to Ethan's sudden instincts, raised an eyebrow but did not object. Ethan's mind returned to the question that had haunted him since childhood. Could true character survive the temptation of limitless wealth? The memory of his mother walking away with a wealthier man burned like a scar, and every woman who had ever crossed his path seemed to confirm that loyalty faded when money entered the equation. Yet as he watched Sophia bask in the spotlight and Lila shrink from it, he wondered if fate had given him a chance to test his theory more directly than ever before. The orchestra paused between pieces, and Ethan stepped forward. Conversations hushed as the billionaire took the stage. His presence commanded attention, and soon all eyes turned toward him. With calm precision, he spoke about the importance of generosity, of how true giving revealed who we were when no one was watching. Then, with a slight smile, he announced something unexpected. Tonight, he said 2 guests would receive a unique opportunity. He gestured toward the Carter sisters, drawing them into the spotlight, whether they wished it or not. The audience turned to look, and Sophia lifted her chin proudly, while Lila froze in surprise. Ethan continued. Each sister would receive a single black credit card tied directly to his personal account. For the next 48 hours, they could spend as they wished, without restriction, without oversight. At the end of that time, he would invite them to return and share what they had chosen to do with the gift. The crowd gasped murmurs, rippled across the ballroom, and cameras surged forward to capture the moment. Ethan handed 2 envelopes to a host who delivered them to the sisters. Sophia accepted hers with a radiant smile, holding it aloft as if it were a trophy. Lila hesitated, her hands trembling as she took the envelope and clutched it tightly, uncertain why she had been chosen for such attention. The gala buzzed with speculation. Guests whispered about what they would buy, if given the chance, some joking about yachts, others about estates in the Hamptons. Sophia reveled in the spotlight, already imagining the headlines her shopping spree would generate. Lila wanted nothing more than to disappear into the crowd, but Ethan's gaze held her for a moment, longer steady and unreadable, before he stepped away from the stage. The test had been set. For Ethan, it was more than entertainment. It was a deliberate experiment born from a lifetime of doubt. He needed to know if integrity could survive when temptation was infinite. He needed to know if sincerity existed beyond glamour. He told himself it was about philosophy, about proving a point to himself, but deep down he also felt the stirrings of hope. Perhaps in the choices these sisters made, he might find an answer to the question that haunted him. Was there still someone in the world who could touch his heart for reasons that had nothing to do with money? Sophia Carter walked out of the gala with her head held high and the black credit card glimmering in her hand, like a passport to the future she had always imagined. The paparazzi who lingered outside immediately clustered around, her snapping photos as she waved the envelope with a practiced flourish. She gave them a few words about how honored she was to be trusted with such generosity, her smile dazzling beneath the camera flashes, but inside her heart raced with anticipation. She could already see the headlines. Rising fashion star Sophia Carter spends billionaire's card with style. She hailed a town car waiting at the curb, slid into the leather seat, and pulled out her phone to broadcast her triumph to her tens of thousands of followers. By morning, the video would trend. By noon, she would be interviewed on podcasts. For Sophia, this was more than money. It was visibility, the currency she valued most. Her first destination was Beverly Hills. The following day, she strode into Rodeo Drive with an entourage of friends and stylists she had hastily assembled from her network. Cameras followed her every move as she entered boutiques lined with glass cases of handbags, racks of gowns, and shelves glittering with shoes worth more than most people's rent. She did not hesitate. She pointed, she tried. She purchased the black card, sliding across counters without resistance. Sales associates fawned, delighted to serve someone who clearly had the confidence of limitless credit. Sophia reveled in the attention, posing for photos with shopping bags stacked at her feet, tagging designers and thanking them publicly for their support. She selected gowns for future red carpet appearances, a dozen pairs of heels she insisted would become her signature, and jewelry that sparkled like captured stars. The spree was intoxicating. Each purchase was a step toward the image she wanted the world to remember, not just as a twin sister to someone shy and unremarkable, but as the woman who proved she belonged in the company of billionaires. By afternoon, she was exhausted but exhilarated, her car stuffed with boxes and bags that barely fit. She checked her phone and smiled at the flood of messages. Her followers adored the spectacle. Some envied her, others praised her boldness, and all of them talked about her. That was all she ever needed, but she was not finished. That evening, she appeared at a rooftop party hosted by a music producer she knew through mutual acquaintances. Draped in a new crimson gown and glittering earrings, she arrived fashionably late with her arms full of luxury gifts. Cameras clicked, and she made sure to be photographed with the right people. At midnight, she raised a toast, thanking Ethan Hayes for his incredible trust. Her words deliberately designed to sound intimate, even though they had barely exchanged sentences. She wanted people to whisper about a possible connection between them, to wonder if perhaps she was the new woman in the billionaire's life. The speculation would only boost her profile. On the second day, she continued her spree. She visited an art gallery where she purchased several expensive modern pieces, not because she loved them, but because she knew the names of the artists carried weight. She ordered custom furniture from an Italian designer and scheduled fittings with couture houses who previously had only lent her pieces. Now she could buy them outright. Her phone was never out of her hand, capturing every moment. She live-streamed from a private jeweler's room. She posted reels of herself, strutting down marble hallways with armfuls of branded bags, and she carefully crafted captions about empowerment, ambition, and seizing opportunity. She made sure the narrative was not about frivolous spending, but about a woman taking control of luxury and making it her own. Yet beneath the glamour, there was a hint of desperation. Sophia could not stop thinking about her sister. Lila had accepted the same card, but vanished quietly into the night. She had no doubt Lila would squander the chance, probably buying something modest or donating it where no one could see. That invisibility infuriated Sophia because she knew people would later compare them. She had to shine brighter, spend louder, and prove that she alone understood how to use such an opportunity. On the evening of the second day, she organized a grand dinner at a 5-star restaurant, inviting influencers, fashion editors, and industry insiders. She reserved the entire rooftop and decorated it with flowers imported that morning. Each guest left with an extravagant gift bag, all paid for with the limitless card. Sophia gave a speech about her vision for the future, about launching her own fashion line and empowering women to embrace glamour. Cameras rolled, guests applauded, and she felt unstoppable. She looked out at the city lights and imagined herself already on the cover of Vogue, her name trending across every platform. Ethan Hayes, noticing her not as a participant in his test, but as the woman destined to share his spotlight. The spree ended with Sophia collapsing onto her velvet sofa at dawn, surrounded by unopened boxes and glittering trophies of her shopping triumph. She scrolled through her feeds, satisfied at the engagement numbers and the endless stream of comments praising her style. In her mind, she had already won. She believed she had proven herself the perfect candidate for Ethan's attention. Someone who knew how to live at his level. She fell asleep, dreaming of Camera's fame and power, never imagining that across town, her sister was using the same black card in ways that would pierce Ethan's heart far more deeply than any diamond necklace ever could. Lila Carter left the gala in silence, the black credit card still tucked in its envelope, as if it might vanish if she looked at it too closely. While Sophia basked in flashing lights and cameras, Lila slipped into the night with only the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears. She returned to her small apartment on the edge of downtown, placed the envelope on her modest wooden table, and stared at it for a long time. She could not fathom why Ethan Hayes, a man she had never spoken to, would trust her with such a thing. The idea of limitless credit frightened her more than it thrilled her. She lived on a careful budget, working part-time, teaching piano at the orphanage, and supplementing her income by giving lessons in private homes. Money was never abundant, but she had always managed. Now here was a card that could purchase anything her imagination desired, and all she could think about was the children she left behind. That night, the ones who had begged her not to cancel their Saturday lesson. Lila slept fitfully, dreaming of glittering stores she did not belong in, of dresses she would never wear, and of a pair of watchful gray eyes that seemed to question her very soul. By morning she knew what she would do. She dressed simply in jeans and a soft sweater, tied her hair back, and took the subway to the orphanage. The children squealed with delight when they saw her. She sat at the old out-of-tune piano in the recreation room and let her fingers dance across the keys, laughter filling the air as they tried to mimic her. When she looked around at their eager faces, she realized her decision had already been made. She would use the card not for herself but for them. Her first stop was a local music shop. The owner nearly fainted when Lila presented the black card, insisting she could buy whatever she needed. She chose carefully, ignoring the gleaming instruments worth small fortunes, and instead selecting durable student models, dozens of violins, flutes, and guitars that small hands could hold. She ordered sheet music workbooks and sturdy cases. The clerk packed everything while Lila explained that she was equipping a children's music program. Word spread quickly, and by the time she left the shop, several curious onlookers were whispering about the shy young woman with the Billionaire's card, who seemed more interested in children's needs than her own. Next, she visited a party supply store. She bought balloons in every color, streamers, and boxes of confetti. She ordered cupcakes and cookies from a bakery down the street, enough to feed the entire orphanage twice over. She even hired a magician she knew from her teaching circuit to perform tricks for the children. Everywhere she went, people expected her to splurge on luxury. But Lila's choices were modest in cost, though extravagant in kindness. She carried bags filled with crayons, soccer balls, board games, and art supplies. She used the card not to elevate her own lifestyle, but to bring joy to lives often overlooked. By afternoon, she returned to the orphanage with a delivery truck in tow. The staff were stunned as boxes of instruments and toys were carried inside. The children screamed with delight, rushing to open packages and clutching new treasures in their small arms. Lila organized the chaos into a celebration. She tied balloons, set up tables with sweets, and distributed the new instruments. When the magician arrived, the children roared with laughter at his antics, and for the first time in months, the orphanage echoed with pure, unrestrained joy. That evening, Lila slipped into the restroom with a small bag of face paint she had purchased. She painted bright red cheeks, a silly nose, and colorful patterns on her skin, transforming herself into a clown. When she emerged, the children shrieked with excitement. She danced, played the piano with exaggerated flourishes, and sang with them until her voice grew hoarse. She laughed so much her stomach hurt, and in those moments she forgot the weight of the card or the judgment of strangers. She was simply Lila, the shy teacher, who had found her courage through their smiles. What she did not know was that Ethan Hayes had been watching. He had followed discreetly after hearing rumors that one of the sisters had spent the card not on luxury, but on children. He stood in the shadow of the doorway as the celebration unfolded, his expensive suit, out of place among paper streamers and frosting-covered fingers. He watched Lila kneel to tie a balloon to a child's wrist, her eyes crinkling with genuine affection. He saw her sit at the piano face paint smudged and play a melody so tender the entire room seemed to still for a heartbeat. For Ethan, it was like seeing a memory of innocence he thought long gone. No camera crew, no self-promotion, just joy freely given. Something cracked inside him. He had expected indulgence, or at best a calculated act of charity. Instead, he witnessed sincerity that no performance could fake. As he leaned against the doorway, his chest tightened with a feeling he had not allowed himself in years. Hope. The next day, Lila continued her mission. She visited a second-hand music store and found an old, upright piano in need of love. She purchased it, hired movers, and spent the afternoon polishing the wood and tuning the keys. By evening, she rolled it into the orphanage and unveiled it to the children. Their cheers filled the air as they crowded around, and Lila played a lively tune that sent them spinning in circles. She taught them simple chords, guiding small fingers on ivory keys, and when one boy managed to play a recognizable melody, the room erupted in applause. She smiled until her cheeks ached. Though she used the black card, she never once thought of Ethan Hayes. To her, this was not about proving worth, but about fulfilling a long-held dream of giving music to those who needed it most. She had grown up shy and often lonely, and music had been her companion. Now she wanted these children to have the same comfort. Late that night, she walked home alone, her dress paint stained, and her hair falling loose. She carried only the memory of their laughter, unaware that someone else carried the memory too. Ethan returned to his penthouse that night, shaken. The image of Sophia strutting down Rodeo Drive in designer heels clashed violently with the vision of Lila sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by children and balloons. He had given both sisters the same card, the same freedom, yet their choices revealed more than he had dared hope. One chased visibility, the other gave joy. And for the first time since he was a boy, he wondered if perhaps not every woman would walk away when tempted with wealth. Perhaps 1 in 1,000 might see value in something more enduring. He poured himself a drink, but left it untouched, staring out at the skyline with a restless ache in his chest. He had thought the test was about them, but he realized it was also about him. What he had seen in Lila's eyes that day unsettled him more than any business competitor ever could. It was sincerity, and sincerity was the one thing he no longer knew how to handle. Ethan Hayes was not a man who sought company lightly, but after witnessing Lila's choices with the card, he could not push her from his mind. 2 days later, he found himself standing outside a small coffee shop near the orphanage where she often stopped after teaching. He had instructed James to make no formal arrangements, no official meetings or press coverage. This was not business. This was curiosity, sharpened into something closer to longing. When Lila walked in, wearing a simple floral dress and carrying sheet music tucked under her arm, Ethan almost doubted himself. She looked so unassuming that for a moment he questioned if this was really the same woman who had orchestrated such joy for dozens of children. He greeted her softly, and she startled, nearly dropping her papers. Her instinct was to apologize, as though she had done something wrong, but Ethan quickly reassured her. He offered to buy her coffee, and after a moment's hesitation, she agreed. They sat by the window, the city moving in waves outside, while inside the space shrank to just the two of them. At first, the conversation was halting. Ethan was used to commanding discussions, but he realized quickly that authority would only silence her. Instead, he asked questions. Why music? Why children? Why she had chosen to spend the card as she did? Lila fiddled with the edge of her cup before answering. She told him she had grown up quiet, often overlooked beside her brighter twin, but music had given her a voice when words failed. She explained that the orphanage reminded her of her own struggles with loneliness, and she wanted the children to have what she once lacked. Ethan listened truly, listened in a way he had not done with anyone in years. Her voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as she realized he was not waiting to interrupt or judge. For the first time since their meeting, he smiled without reservation. He told her that she had surprised him, and she looked down quickly, cheeks coloring. He admitted that he had expected extravagance, that he had grown cynical, and her choices had forced him to reconsider. She whispered that she had not wanted the card at all. It had felt like a burden, like a spotlight she did not know how to stand under. But when she saw the children, the decision had come easily. The simplicity of her honesty disarmed him. Hours passed unnoticed. Ethan spoke of his own past in fragments, something he rarely allowed himself to do. He told her about Chicago, about the mother who had left him behind, about the coldness that settled into his home after she was gone. He did not dramatize it, but shared it as a truth that explained why trust was so difficult for him. Lila's eyes softened, and she said quietly that music had saved her in similar ways. After their parents divorced, she and Sophia had coped differently. Sophia had chased recognition, determined to never be overlooked again, while Lila had withdrawn, finding comfort in keys and melodies. She admitted that sometimes she felt invisible, even to her own family, but in invisibility, she had discovered freedom to choose kindness without needing applause. Their stories wound together like two melodies blending in harmony. Ethan felt the walls he had built begin to shift. Here was someone who asked nothing of him, who did not seem awed by his wealth, who even seemed uncomfortable when he mentioned it. She asked instead about his favorite pieces of music, his hobbies beyond the empire, his dreams if money had not defined his life. He had no ready answers and realized how long it had been since anyone cared to ask. The following weeks saw more meetings, some deliberate, some seemingly accidental. Ethan visited the orphanage under the guise of supporting its programs, but in truth he wanted to watch Lila at the piano. He stood at the back while children crowded around her, their small voices lifting in song as she guided them. She was different here, animated and confident in her own quiet way, her shyness melting in the warmth of their trust. He saw a strength in her he had missed at first glance. One afternoon he stayed after the children left. Lila played a slow, haunting piece she had composed herself. When she finished, she looked up surprised to find him still there. He told her it was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. She blushed and shrugged, saying it was just something she wrote when she felt alone. He replied softly that it made him feel less alone just hearing it. The words hung between them, heavier than he intended. She looked at him as though seeing not the billionaire, but the man beneath, and for a moment he almost believed she did. Yet the shadow of Sophia lingered in the background. Sophia noticed his growing presence around Lila and grew increasingly irritated. She made remarks to their family about Lila seeking advantage, whispered to friends that her sister was naive but calculating. Lila ignored the gossip, but Ethan could not ignore the way Sophia's ambition sharpened whenever their paths crossed. He saw in her the mirror of every woman who had once chased his fortune, and it made him wary, but it also made him protective of Lila. One evening after another long day at Hayes & Co., Ethan invited Lila to his office. She hesitated, but he promised no grand gestures, only music. He revealed a grand piano he kept in the corner rarely touched. He asked her to play. She did, filling the sleek modern space with sound that seemed to soften the steel and glass around them. Ethan sat close, listening, his mind quiet for once. When she finished, he thanked her not as a CEO, thanking entertainment, but as a man grateful for peace. She told him gently that he deserved peace too. Those words echoed in him long after she left. It was not romance yet, not openly, but it was the slow weaving of trust between two people scarred by different battles. For Ethan, it was both terrifying and intoxicating. For Lila, it was confusing, for she had never imagined someone like him noticing someone like her. Still, each meeting left them both changed, as if the walls of his glass tower were beginning to crack, letting light in where darkness had lived too long. Sophia Carter had always known how to command a room, but lately she noticed something unsettling. No matter how dazzling her outfits, no matter how carefully curated her public appearances, Ethan Hayes's eyes seemed to drift past her toward Lila. At first, Sophia dismissed it as imagination. Men always noticed her first. Lila was the quiet one, the shadow, the background character in a story that belonged to Sophia. But as days turned into weeks, it became impossible to ignore. Ethan showed up at the orphanage under the guise of corporate philanthropy, but his gaze softened only when Lila was near. Sophia watched him linger as her sister played piano, saw him smile at words that barely carried above a whisper, and fury coiled inside her chest like smoke looking for a fire. She had worked too hard to be overshadowed now. To Sophia, Ethan represented more than wealth. He was validation proof that she belonged in the rarefied air of billionaires and decision-makers. If she could capture his attention, her career would skyrocket her name, etched not just on runways but in headlines. Yet every gesture she made toward him seemed to bounce off his armor. When she laughed too loudly at a gala joke, he barely glanced her way. When she posted glamorous photos from Paris Fashion Week, he did not even click like. Instead, he spent quiet hours with Lila in coffee shops. No paparazzi bothered to visit. The insult cut deeper than any rejection she had faced. How could Lila, the shy sister who still lived in a modest apartment and taught children for pennies, compete with everything Sophia had built? The jealousy grew unbearable, and Sophia began to plot. She understood the media. She knew how quickly perception could be shaped with the right whispers. One evening at a dinner with friends who thrived on gossip, she spoke casually about Lila's sudden closeness to Ethan. She framed it as concern, noting how odd it was that her shy sister, once invisible, now seemed always in the orbit of the billionaire. She suggested that perhaps Lila was smarter than she appeared, that maybe the piano teacher persona was a calculated mask to win sympathy. The remarks spread faster than wildfire. Soon, blogs speculated about the shy twin making moves on the mogul. Social media lit up with side-by-side photos of Sophia in glamorous gowns and Lila in simple dresses, captions questioning who was the better match. Sophia fed the fire with subtle posts portraying herself as hardworking and ambitious, while painting Lila as manipulative in silence. Meanwhile, Ethan sensed the tension, but underestimated its depth. He invited both sisters to a small company event, hoping to ease the rift. The evening began smoothly, but when Sophia took the stage to present a donation pledge, her speech dripped with veiled barbs. She praised herself for using opportunities wisely, for turning gifts into platforms for being transparent, unlike those who preferred to act in secrecy. Every word was a dagger aimed at Lila. Lila stood frozen among the guests, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wanted to defend herself, to say that her actions were never about image, but speaking in front of the crowds had always terrified her. She stayed silent, cheeks flushed, eyes fixed on the floor. When she finally glanced up, Ethan was watching, his expression unreadable. The silence pressed down heavier than Sophia's words. Later that night, away from the crowd, Ethan confronted Lila gently. He asked if what Sophia implied was true, if she had orchestrated the orphanage events to make herself look virtuous. The question sliced through her. She stared at him, heart-hammering, unable to believe that after everything he had seen, after every honest conversation they had shared, he still harbored doubt. She whispered no, that was never her intention, but his hesitation lingered in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Tears pricked her eyes. She told him she did not need his money or his spotlight, that music and the children were enough. If he could not see, that perhaps he never would. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him with the echo of her disappointment. Sophia, watching from a distance, allowed herself a small, victorious smile. She believed she had finally restored the balance, finally reminded Ethan who truly belonged by his side. Yet in that moment of triumph, she failed to see that her tactics had planted not trust, but confusion in Ethan's mind. His doubt had wounded Lila, and that wound threatened to break the fragile bond they had begun to weave. For the first time since meeting her, Ethan felt the old fear resurface, the fear that love was only an illusion waiting to collapse. The whispers Sophia had sown soon grew teeth. What began as quiet speculation among society pages turned into full-scale headlines within days. Tabloids splashed photos of Lila leaving the orphanage, exaggerated captions suggesting that her charity events were nothing more than carefully staged performances to catch Ethan Hayes' attention. Influencers repeated, the narrative bloggers dissected her every outfit, and suddenly the shy twin who had never courted the spotlight became the subject of a storm she could not escape. The real blow came when forged documents appeared online, leaked to a gossip site notorious for sensational stories. The papers alleged that Lila had misused Ethan's black card to funnel money through shell organizations under the guise of donations. The numbers were twisted to imply that much of the money had vanished into her personal accounts. None of it was true, but the timing was devastating. Images of Lila surrounded by laughing children at the orphanage were now framed as evidence of manipulation, a scheme designed to disguise greed behind painted smiles. Overnight, she went from anonymous piano teacher to trending scandal. Paparazzi camped outside her building. Parents of her private students pulled their children from lessons afraid of association. The orphanage director, under pressure, asked her to take a leave of absence until the matter was cleared. Lila sat in her small apartment, staring at the walls, her phone buzzing endlessly with messages she could not bear to read. She had never sought attention, and now attention consumed her in the ugliest way. Ethan watched the chaos unfold from his office high above Manhattan. His team forwarded him articles, his board demanded explanations, and James urged him to release a statement defending Lila. Yet Ethan hesitated. Old fears clawed at him. He remembered his mother's letter, the promises of love followed by betrayal. He remembered every gold digger who had smiled too sweetly at his parties. What if the documents were real? What if he had been blind again? He replayed her words in his mind, the tremble in her voice, when she told him she did not need his money. But hadn't others said the same before leaving with pockets full? His doubt was poison, and though part of him knew better, he allowed silence to stretch. For Lila, that silence was louder than any accusation. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that Ethan would stand by her, that he would see through the lies. Instead, days passed without a word from him. Each morning she woke to new headlines each evening. She cried herself to sleep, with the weight of betrayal pressing on her chest. Finally, she made her decision. She placed the black card back in its envelope, the same envelope she had once received, with trembling hands, and wrote a note in simple script. "I never wanted your money. I only wanted music and peace." She left the envelope with the doorman of Hayes & Co. headquarters and walked away without looking back. Across town, Sophia basked in her victory. She had orchestrated the scandal, carefully hiring a private investigator to fabricate documents and paying insiders to leak them. She knew how the media worked. Once a story took root, truth mattered little. Perception was everything, and perception now painted her sister as a manipulator. Sophia told herself it was necessary. Lila had always been a threat, not because she sought fame, but because her quiet authenticity shone brighter than glitter. Sophia could not allow that light to eclipse her. Yet even as she celebrated, she felt a small unease. She had underestimated the depth of Ethan's interest. She had planted doubt, yes, but she had also forced him to confront feelings he had long buried. In the stillness of his penthouse, Ethan held the envelope in his hands, reading Lila's note until the words blurred. He felt something break inside him. He had asked for proof that not all women cared about wealth, and she had given it. She had walked away without a cent, leaving behind only truth. And he, in his hesitation, had failed her. The city outside sparkled as if mocking him. He had all the power in the world, yet he could not undo the damage of his silence. The board wanted him to distance himself from scandal. His advisors urged him to stay quiet until the story burned out. But Ethan could not stop seeing Lila's tear-streaked face when she realized he doubted her. He poured a glass of whiskey, left it untouched, and stared at the piano in the corner. He pressed a single key, the note lingering like a ghost, and admitted for the first time in years that he was afraid. Afraid not of betrayal, but of having lost the one person who had shown him sincerity. Meanwhile, Lila retreated further into herself. She avoided calls from Sophia, ignored the reporters outside her door, and buried herself in playing the piano until her fingers ached. She played for no one now, not even the children. The orphanage halls were silent without her. She wondered if she had been foolish to believe a man like Ethan could ever see her as more than a passing experiment. Perhaps she was destined always to be invisible, useful only until someone brighter decided to take her place. The scandal had twisted everything good into something shameful. Yet even in her despair, she held on to one truth. She had acted with love. She had used the card not for fame or fortune, but to bring joy. No headline could erase the memory of children's laughter echoing around her. That knowledge was the only shield she had left. For Ethan, the scandal was a mirror. It forced him to confront not just the lies Sophia spread, but the deeper lie he had lived by for decades, the belief that no woman could ever be trusted. He had used that belief to shield himself from pain, but now it had cost him something irreplaceable. His empire still stood, his wealth untouched, but the hollow victory tasted bitter. For the first time, he began to question whether the tower he built to protect himself had become his prison. Ethan Hayes had faced hostile takeovers, market crashes, and competitors who would have celebrated his ruin, but nothing unsettled him like the silence that followed Lila's departure. The envelope with the black card and her note remained on his desk for days untouched, except for the countless times he reread her handwriting. "I never wanted your money. I only wanted music and peace." Those words haunted him more than any accusation because they were not a plea or a defense. They were truth spoken with finality, a truth he had been too blind to recognize. He walked through the halls of Hayes & Co. with his usual composure, but inside he was unraveling. Every meeting felt hollow, every deal meaningless. Numbers and contracts could not drown out the memory of her laughter at the orphanage, the sight of her painted face as she played piano with the children, the quiet strength in her eyes when she spoke about music as if it were life itself. He pored over the supposed evidence against her line by line and began to notice discrepancies. Transfers that did not match her schedule signatures, slightly off organizations that did not exist in government records. James, loyal and relentless, had been investigating quietly, and one evening entered Ethan's office with a folder of findings. He laid down proof that the scandal had been fabricated, traced back to a network of shady accounts, and one familiar name: Sophia Carter. The revelation should not have shocked Ethan, yet it did. He realized he had known all along deep inside that Lila was incapable of such deceit, yet his fear the wound left by his mother had paralyzed him. He had repeated history, choosing doubt over trust, silence over defense. James confronted him with brutal honesty. "You always said you wanted to find someone who saw you for yourself. She did, and you broke her heart by hesitating." The words cut, but they also cleared the fog clouding Ethan's mind. He saw the truth with painful clarity. His life of caution, his obsession with protecting himself, had become a cage. The moment someone finally reached for him with sincerity, he pushed them away. He had lived so long fearing betrayal that he had created it with his own hands. For the first time since boyhood, he allowed himself to cry alone in his penthouse where no cameras could see. The tears did not weaken him, they cleansed him. When the storm passed, he felt lighter, as if the boy in Chicago had finally released the weight he carried. He knew what he had to do. The next morning he summoned Sophia to his office. She arrived in designer heels and a smile she believed irresistible, but Ethan's expression was carved from stone. He laid the folder before her, the evidence of her deception undeniable. She tried to protest, to spin stories about protecting her sister, but Ethan's voice was cold as he told her the game was over. He would ensure the world knew the truth. Her career, her reputation, her carefully crafted image would crumble under the exposure of her lies. Sophia's face paled, and for the first time she seemed small. A woman cornered by the very power she sought to manipulate. Ethan dismissed her with finality, but the victory felt empty. He did not want revenge. He wanted redemption. That night he returned to the orphanage, the place where Lila had given so much of herself. The staff greeted him cautiously, unsure of his intentions after the scandal, but he asked only to walk the halls. He entered the music room where the piano sat, its keys worn from countless lessons. He touched the instrument gently, remembering the sound of Lila's compositions, and vowed to bring her back. He could not undo his hesitation, but he could prove through action that he had changed. He began by funding the orphanage anonymously, ensuring the children's programs would thrive. He organized new scholarships, hired additional staff, and supplied instruments under the condition that no announcement carried his name. It was not about visibility. It was about honoring what Lila valued. Yet he knew that was only the beginning. Redemption required more than money. It required humility, the willingness to stand vulnerable before her and admit his failure. He rehearsed the words in his mind, but rejected them each time. Apologies were easy. What mattered was sincerity, and sincerity could not be scripted. Weeks passed before Ethan finally learned where Lila had gone. James tracked her to a small town upstate where she had taken refuge, giving piano lessons quietly and avoiding headlines. Ethan drove himself there without a chauffeur, his luxury car incongruous on the winding rural roads. He found her in a community center, surrounded by children eager to learn. He stood at the doorway, just as he had that night at the orphanage, but this time he did not remain in the shadows. He stepped forward, and the children gasped at the sight of the billionaire they had seen in newspapers. Lila froze at the piano, her hands hovering above the keys, her heart racing at his sudden presence. Ethan's voice broke the silence steady, but filled with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I failed you, Lila. I let my fear speak louder than my heart. I doubted you when you gave me every reason to trust. I do not deserve forgiveness, but I am asking anyway." The children watched wide-eyed as the powerful man they had seen on screens lowered his head, admitting fault. Lila's chest tightened, torn between anger and longing. She wanted to tell him it was too late, that the wound was too deep. Yet she remembered his laughter with the children, the way he had listened to her music, the rare softness in his eyes when he allowed himself to be human. Tears blurred her vision. Ethan continued saying that he had exposed Sophia's lies, that he would clear Lila's name publicly, but that none of it mattered if she could not find it in her heart to believe in him again. He ended simply, "I want to learn how to trust, and I want to start with you." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the piano strings. Lila searched his face, and for the first time saw not the untouchable billionaire, but the boy still standing in a Chicago doorway, waiting for someone to choose him. Her anger wavered, her defenses crumbled, and she whispered that trust would take time. Ethan nodded, accepting, relieved and grateful. For the first time in his life, he had laid down his armor, and she had not turned away. News spread quickly once Ethan Hayes moved. The same media outlets that had delighted in tearing Lila apart now scrambled to cover the sudden turn. Invitations went out for a press conference at the orphanage itself, not in a polished Manhattan boardroom, but in the modest hall where children's drawings still decorated the walls. It was a deliberate choice, Ethan insisted. If the world was going to see the truth, they would see it where the truth had lived all along. Reporters filled the space cameras lined the back, and whispers buzzed with speculation. Ethan entered without his usual armor of sleek suits and cool detachment. He wore a simple shirt and dark blazer, his hair slightly disheveled. His expression stripped of pretense. James walked beside him but did not speak. This was Ethan's reckoning. At the front of the room, the piano stood waiting, and beside it, Lila hovered uncertainly drawn into the storm she never asked for. She had resisted his request, at first terrified of more humiliation, but Ethan had convinced her with quiet persistence. He told her that this time he would be the one in the spotlight, not her. She agreed only because she saw in his eyes a sincerity she had never seen before. When the cameras flashed, Ethan raised his hand for silence. His voice carried steady but raw, not the rehearsed cadence of a CEO, but the trembling honesty of a man finally speaking from his heart. He began by recounting the story from the beginning. He explained how at the gala he had given both sisters a card with no limits, how he had thought it was a harmless experiment, but in truth it was born from old wounds and mistrust. He admitted that his cynicism had blinded him, that he had expected greed, and when he saw generosity, he doubted it because he did not know how to believe in something pure. He turned then toward Lila, his eyes holding hers, and continued. This woman, he said, used my card not for herself but for children who had nothing. She bought instruments and books. She filled these halls with laughter. She gave them a piece of her heart. And when lies tried to destroy her, I failed to stand by her. I failed because I was afraid of being betrayed again, and in my fear I betrayed her myself. Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked, but the room seemed to shrink until it held only the two of them. Ethan stepped closer, his voice thickening. I have built empires, negotiated contracts worth billions, and faced men who would see me ruined, but none of that scared me as much as this moment. Because this is the first time in my life I am asking for something money cannot buy. He reached into his pocket and drew out the envelope she had returned, placing it gently on the piano. I do not want this card back, he said. I want you to know that you were right all along. Love is not about money. It is about heart. You showed me that. And now I am asking, will you let me spend the rest of my life proving I have learned it? Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was no corporate statement. This was a confession, public and irrevocable. Ethan Hayes, the untouchable billionaire, had bared his soul for the world to see. Lila's breath caught. She felt every pair of eyes on her, every camera waiting for her reaction. But in that instant, she saw only him. The boy behind the man, the fear behind the fortune, the sincerity that now outweighed all his mistakes. Tears welled in her eyes. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear enough for the microphones. I never wanted your empire, Ethan. I never wanted your spotlight. I only wanted honesty. If you can give me that, then maybe I can give you my trust again." The room erupted reporters, shouting questions, children clapping, without fully understanding, staff members wiping their eyes. Ethan did not hesitate. He dropped to one knee, not with a ring, but with empty hands that carried more weight than diamonds. He took her hand, kissed it gently, and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Lila's tears spilled freely as she nodded, and the cameras captured the moment that would dominate headlines for weeks. Billionaire confesses love at orphanage. Billionaire begs forgiveness from shy sister. But for Ethan and Lila, the noise of the world faded. What mattered was the fragile thread of trust they were weaving back together in that small hall filled with drawings and music. The press conference ended in chaos, questions flying, but Ethan shielded Lila as they left his arm around her in silent promise. Outside, the city roared with speculation, but inside his heart there was only stillness. For the first time since childhood, he felt free. Free of fear, free of doubt. Free to believe that love could exist outside the shadow of wealth. He had confessed not just to the world, but to himself, and in her tearful smile, he found the answer he had been searching for all along. 1 year later, the sea breeze swept across a quiet stretch of Cape Cod beach, where rows of white chairs had been set in the sand, and wildflowers swayed gently in the wind. Guests gathered in soft murmurs, but the ceremony was simple by design. Ethan Hayes could have rented a cathedral, could have flown in celebrities, could have turned his wedding into a spectacle the press would fight to cover, but he did not. Instead, he and Lila chose intimacy, a celebration not of wealth, but of love. Lila walked barefoot down the aisle, her navy gown replaced by a flowing cream dress that shimmered softly in the sunlight. She carried no jewels except the small pendant that had once belonged to her mother, and when Ethan turned to see her approach, his heart clenched with the same awe he had felt the first night he saw her in that ballroom. They exchanged vows written in their own words, his voice unsteady with emotion, hers trembling with quiet joy. When they kissed the children from the orphanage, released balloons into the sky, bright colors rising against the blue horizon, and the sound of their laughter carried over the waves. It was not a grand display, but it was perfect. In the months that followed, Ethan and Lila poured themselves into creating the Harmony Foundation, a program dedicated to bringing music education to underprivileged youth across the country. They used Hayes & Co. resources to fund instruments, teachers, and scholarships, but insisted that the foundation's spotlight remain on the children, not on them. The once cold halls of Ethan's penthouse transformed into a home where piano music echoed in the evenings, and simple dinners were shared without pretense. Lila teased him about his inability to boil pasta, and he teased her about leaving sheet music on every surface, their banter soft and affectionate. They did not live without challenges, but they faced them together, and each day Ethan felt the boy inside him healing a little more. Sophia faded from the headlines, her schemes exposed. Her career stalled. She retreated from the public eye, a cautionary tale of ambition turned sour. Lila sometimes wondered about her sister with a pang of sorrow, but Ethan would take her hand and remind her that not all stories could be rewritten. They had chosen theirs, and it was enough. One evening, as the sun set beyond the water, Lila sat at the piano in their beach house, playing the same gentle melody she had once played for the children. Ethan leaned against the doorway, watching her, his chest full. He remembered the man he had been before her, closed off, armored, unreachable, and marveled at how far he had come. When she finished, she turned and smiled, her eyes alight, with the kind of love that asked for nothing but gave everything. In that moment, Ethan knew he had finally answered the question that had haunted him since childhood. Yes, someone could love him beyond wealth. Yes, someone could see him for who he was, not what he owned. And yes, love was possible, even for a man who had once believed it was a myth. The shy sister who touched his heart had become his wife, his partner, and his peace. And as the waves crashed gently against the shore, Ethan whispered a promise he intended to keep forever. No more tests, no more doubts, only love. Thank you for watching Ethan and Lila's journey from a reckless billionaire's test to a love story that proved money cannot measure the heart. And now we want to hear from you, our community, because your voice keeps this channel alive. So take a moment and drop a comment below, telling us what city or country you are watching from. We love seeing our family spread across the world, from New York to Texas to London to small towns we have never even heard of. It makes every story feel bigger than just words on a screen. And while you are here, do not forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Your ratings help us understand what touches you most, so we can bring you more tales that lift your spirit. And if Ethan and Lila's journey reminded you of someone in your own life, maybe a friend who proved their loyalty when you least expected, or a love that grew out of the simplest gestures, share that too, because your stories inspire others who read the comments. Remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next premiere, because we already have new emotional stories in the works, filled with twists, heartbreaks, and redemptions that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And if you want to support us further, consider sharing this video with a friend or family member who loves romance, because sharing is how this community grows stronger every day. Now it is your turn. Tell us where you are watching from. Give us your rating and get ready for the next story, because love, hope, and second chances are waiting right here for you.